Okay, Jim DeAndrea, welcome to the House of Shadows and Ink.
Thank you.
So, before we dive into everything, basically just give us like a summary, who you are, what you do, why you're here.
Sure. So my name is Jim DeAndrea. I live in Charleston, South Carolina, um, and I am a writer. My first novel is forthcoming October 10th. It's called The Haunting of Ashley Hall School, and it is being published by Crystal Cove Press, which is a shingle of Crystal Lake Publishing. Um, and it is basically a young adult Gothic horror story. So I'm pretty excited about that. I've got a history in writing, but this is the first time I've written a novel. Previous to this, I did
Okay.
screenwriting because I worked in the film business. I worked on a film crew as a production assistant and at times an assistant to the directors on a couple of movies. I've done a lot of different jobs in my life, interesting jobs, and but that was definitely one of them. So I focused on screenwriting for a long time. I wrote a lot of screenplays. I think I've written about 15 feature-length screenplays,
Cool.
some TV pilots. I did get, pretty far down the line with some of it. They were repped at. I had one script that was repped at William Morris Endeavor. I had another script that was repped at Paradigm. There were comedy scripts. I wrote all comedy back then. It was mostly lowbrow comedy. But I was never able to get a movie made. I was never able to, it was always close. They would shop it around. It was right there. I had a producer attached to it. Had good agents representing it, but it's just, it's one of those things. It's, timing has to be right. You have to get a little bit of luck, which has just never been something that I've had a lot of. But I hung in there for a long time, and then eventually I always wanted to write prose. The whole reason I started writing was because I wanted to write novels, and so I finally just said, you know what, I'm gonna write a novel instead here because I was spinning my wheels trying to get a movie made and sold, and it was driving me crazy. And I wanted to write a different genre. My two genres were comedy and horror. Those were the two genres that I always loved growing up, which is kind of, I don't know if it's ironic or not because they're sort of the opposite sides of the same coin. But writing a novel that's a comedy isn't really a genre that's a big seller anyway. I think that's more of a movie type of thing. But I think Gothic horror is pretty popular, so I figured I would just make a switch, write a horror story. I had several ideas, and so I went with this one. I kept thinking about a boarding school. I always wanted to write a story, a spooky story about a boarding school where these high school girls find, a videotape hidden in a condemned building, and they find something on the videotape. So that was always kind of in my mind. And so I took the opportunity. It was probably about 2 years ago I started writing The Haunting of Ashley Hall School. I got the name because there is a school in Charleston where I live called Ashley Hall School. It's like I can throw a tennis ball and hit the building. So I named it after them for, pay homage to that school, and maybe they'll, put it in their library. So worked hard on that, went through the process of doing what writers do, which is sending queries to agents, and any publishers that were open for submissions, going through that process that, I went through a million times with screenplays and the same thing with novels. And I was fortunate enough to catch Crystal Lake when you were open for submissions, and that was last October. We made the deal to publish it. So here it is a year later, and it is coming to
Oh, awesome.
fruition.
No, I can't wait. Yes, so yes, I remember we had a chat about a year or so ago, and it was quite interesting because, like you said, you've had like a hand in a lot of pies, and like you picked up a lot of skills over the years, and like I mean, these are things that you're going to take with you in the road ahead. And I'm sure that you use that experience in your work. And by the way, horror and comedy is actually very closer than people think. Like
Yeah.
you're still building up to that release, so it's not like a jump scare, but it's like the punchline.
Yes.
You still have to
Yes.
take people, build up, get there. So it's actually much closer than people think, and it's different techniques, but and I love it when horror and comedy can like come together perfectly. You know, like Shaun of the Dead, those kinds of movies.
Yes.
So for people who want to get into screenwriting, we know, and everyone needs to know, like the odds of being successful is like very low. But I mean, that's in everything.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean we're gonna stop doing it. And by the way, like, don't close that door. Keep it open. You might still get something. So
Oh yeah.
I'd say write a novel or two, write a screenplay, like shop it around, go back to a novel, that kind of stuff. So screenwriting, like for someone who has never even tried it, where do they go? What do they do?
So a few things. First of all, when you're talking about the horror and comedy being so close to each other, you're right. You do see a lot of it. You see it with people like Jordan Peele when he was, he used to do all this crazy comedy stuff, and then he ended up getting into doing horror films. And for me, I'm just hearkening back to when I was a kid. I remember I loved watching comedy shows, and one of my favorite was Abbott and Costello, which they were, gone by the time I was, watching them. It was reruns in black and white, but I always thought Abbott and Costello were fantastic. In fact, me and a friend of mine were in a talent show in the 4th grade, and we portrayed Abbott and Costello. We did the Who's on First, What's on Second, I don't know who's on Third sketch for the talent show. We got 2nd place. They gave it to these girls who sang It's a Hard Knock Life. So they walked away with the gold. We got the silver. I'm still bitter about it, but we at least got some acknowledgement. But that was the thing that the first time I saw genres blending together is when I saw Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein. And I can remember watching it and being sort of fascinated with the fact that it was funny because it was Abbott and Costello, but it was actually scary because there was Dracula was in it, Frankenstein, and the Wolfman. So it had Lon Chaney was in it, Bela Lugosi was in it, and it was the first time I kind of started to understand that you can blend different genres in storytelling, and those two, even though they seem to be completely opposites, really do have a connection. You're right about that, 100%, and so that it took me a while to think about that. I actually saw Quentin Tarantino do an interview, and he was talking about I can't remember what movie he was referencing, but he was talking about his first time that he saw that, and that's what made me think of it. I was like, that it never really occurred to me that was what was going on, but I always had that. It was almost a little bit traumatic because I was young and I was spooked, but then it was funny with Abbott and Costello, so it was a good that's a good point. And then following up with what you said about continuing to write screenplays, I absolutely will. As a matter of fact, I already wrote a pilot episode for the novel that I'm coming out with, The Haunting of Ashley Hall School, and I have a producer attached to it. His name is Chris Meyer. He's a guy, I've known him for a long time. He's a hustler. He gets stuff done. He and I have talked multiple times, and we're going to see if we can get some form of screen, either a television show or a movie based on the book. So those doors are going to be open, and I think it's a huge plus for me, to have the that background in the film business. There's a lot of people I can call, a lot of people I can send stuff to try and take what I write in novel form and put it into a movie, because it's all storytelling, whether you're doing it with screenwriting or whether you're doing it as a novelist. But a lot of times studios won't hire a novelist to write the screenplay because it is different, and if they're not used to it, they bungle it. Where my background, having written so many screenplays, I can kind of make that transition. So as far as people wanting to learn how to do screenwriting, so I got a job when I was like 25 years old. I graduated college. I moved to California. I was a social worker in San Francisco, and I got an opportunity to work on a movie called Kingpin. Woody Harrelson was in it. Bill Murray was in it. I think that you've seen.
Yes.
Yeah. It was a funny movie. They were filming it in Pittsburgh, and I was a low-level production assistant. I was a location assistant, they called it. I made $100 a day. The days were brutal. It was like 18 hours a day. But the reason that I did it is I wanted to kind of, I knew I wanted to be a writer already. And so I wanted to read the screenplay, and I wanted to see how, it all sort of came together. So I read that script. It was the same guys that wrote the Tom Hanks movie with the mermaid. We follow in John Candy.
Oh, yes.
I can't even think of the name of it right now.
Splash.
Thank you. I was thinking Squid, but Mike Squid did the cover
Squid.
for our book. Splash. Cool. So it's the same guys that wrote Splash. They wrote Kingpin, and and it was a good screenplay. And so I ended up reading it, and I thought to myself, I was like, well, how much did these guys get paid? What did the producer, what did these guys make for this thing? And he told me, I don't know, it was like $500,000 or something like that. And I remember thinking, I can do this, man. I can write, I could write this story. Like, what's so special about that? So that started my journey in screenwriting, and then as I did it, I wrote my first screenplay, and it was terrible. It was absolutely atrocious. It was about two brothers that win the lottery, and they buy the Boston Red Sox because they think they can turn them into World Series champions. It was called Armchair Owners. It wasn't a bad premise. The Red Sox hadn't won the World Series at that time in like 80-something years. But the execution was terrible. But I did get it done, and it felt great to do, and it was very rewarding. And so as I gave it to people, producers and directors who were on the film that I worked on that I had befriended, they tore it to shreds, and they told me everything that was wrong with it. And it was just like, but they would say, but the writing's good. You got some funny stuff in here. It is funny. It's just, you totally screwed the whole thing up in so many other ways. And so, after writing like 3 or 4 or 5 screenplays, I started to understand a little bit more about how to plan the screenplay. So I kind of did it. It was sort of a baptism by fire. It was like, just start writing them. So what you do is you want to go online, find screenplays to read so you see how they're formatted, or you can just get a book and it shows you how they're formatted, because it's different than writing a novel. It's very driven by dialogue. And then you just want to try and do one. And some people will start with a short. You could write a short film that's 10 minutes long, so it might only be a 12-page screenplay. I went for a feature-length one. It was like 120 pages. And the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. I hear people all the time saying do you have any advice for young writers? They ask pro writers, what should young writers do? And they say, read. You should read a lot of books and stuff. And I always thought to myself, you should write. You should write a lot of books. Like, if you want to be a writer, write. It's like if you want to be a baseball player, you don't watch a bunch of baseball. You go out and you play. Reading stuff is fantastic if you have time to do it. It's great because it helps with understanding storytelling, and it's enjoyable. But writing a lot will make you a better writer, because you'll see how bad your writing is at the beginning, but there'll be little pieces of it that are good, and you'll kind of cling to that, and then you'll think, when I get this next one going, I don't want to feel that same sort of embarrassment when somebody tells me it's that the story is terrible. So I'm going to take my time and make it better and better. And so that would be what I would tell people to do as far as writing one. And then from there, it's difficult to it's difficult to get it into anybody's hands. I mean, as far as getting it to, you can give it to your mom and your brother and your best friend and stuff, and they'll be like, oh, it's fantastic. But trying to get a screenplay to an agent to represent you is very, very difficult to do. Trying to get a screenplay to a producer who, can actually move it up the line. It's very, very difficult to do. So you just have to be ready to get rejected a lot. I mean, I've gotten rejections in my life that I'm immune to it. It doesn't even bother me anymore. And you just send it out and you just keep going, keep trying. That's really the hardest part. Once you write it, you'll feel good. But it's difficult to get representation. It's difficult to get it into the hands of a producer. But it does happen. So, I mean, if you really want to do it, do it. You never know, because all you need is one break. And it's not always going to be the greatest screenwriter in the world that gets that break. There's people making a living in Hollywood that, aren't that fantastic. They just happen to, get the right connections, and they worked them properly and things like that. So
I've even met a few screenwriters who make a living off writing screenplays, but they've never had a movie made.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, they've earned millions.
Yeah.
But no fame that comes with it.
No,
It's still sad, but I mean, it's something that you love. So.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of guys that that write screenplays that make good money. They sell them for 6 figures, and the movies never get made. If you keep doing that for long enough, you'll eventually get less and less, and the studios will take, more caution and taking a chance on you. You want to get something to pop eventually, even if it's just a low budget movie. But yeah, I mean, 100%. There's people out there that never see their stuff on the big screen, but they still continue to make a living doing it, and they're successful. I mean, if they're selling them, they're doing something right. Whether it's just the idea that they come up with, or again, if they just are good at pitching the story, if they can get in the door to a studio and pitch the story, then sometimes studios say, all right, well, yeah, we'll do it. We'll give you $100,000 or whatever, and they end up, like you said, making a living doing it, and they don't see their stuff come to fruition. But
back to Kingpin quickly. I believe you had like a cameo in the movie.
I did, yeah.
But so what I actually want to talk about is like on-set behavior. Like, so you're young, up and coming, you want to meet the right people, that kind of stuff. So how did you approach being on set, chatting to people? Like, I bet you need to like show a lot of energy, like, and say yes to everything and run around like a mad person and just get things done. Because I think the last thing you need on set is like a lazy person who's just like in the way kind of thing. So how did you get that, like, oh, come on for part of the movie?
Yeah. So I was in a scene with Bill Murray. It was great. The directors were always taking people on the crew, and they would put them in a scene because people like to be in movies. So you see the movie, and like, this guy's we works in catering. That guy's a grip. That dude's a production assistant. He was a stand-in. Blah blah blah. So they put him in different scenes, and so I got into a scene with Bill Murray and Woody Harrelson both. It was at the end of the movie. They're in a bowling tournament. It's this big $1 million bowling tournament, and Woody Harrelson's about to bowl, and he looks up at the screen in front of him, and it says, Roy, which is his name in the movie. Roy, I made a mistake. Marry me. Claudia, who's the woman that he's in love with. Vanessa Angel was the actress who played it, and she was on the TV show Weird Science, the TV version of that. She was a very good-looking woman. So he turns around in the movie, turns around to see, he's thinking that she's there, and Bill Murray's at the teleprompter.
Oh, yes.
Like he's writing it to mess with him.
I remember that.
And he gets up and he starts laughing, and he's flanked by me and a couple of buddies, my buddy Jimmy Badstibner, and then this other woman and a couple other people, and we're all laughing. So the camera goes back and forth a couple of times. So you could see me in it. It gave me they gave me a credit in it, whatever, actor credit. There wasn't much acting involved. We had to laugh, and it was actually harder than you think because it was dead silent. Like when you're filming, it goes dead silent because they have to get the noise, even they have to get everything. So they're just like action, and you have to start going and it's really awkward, like to try and make yourself like laugh really hard, especially if you're nervous. But I can remember Bill was talking to us. There was like four of us, and he knew that none of us were actors. And he said to us, "The only advice I'll give you is overact." He said, "That's the biggest thing that people don't do." He's like, "Overdo it. That's the way you should do it." And I remember thinking, that's pretty good advice. So I did. I really, when I saw the results, it looked pretty good. It looked like I'm really laughing. It looks like I'm laughing really hard. And I have that picture. I have the actual picture on my website. I have a website that I built after I got this book published. The website is hollywoodbloodletter.com. And if you go to that website, I think it's on the first page at the bottom. There's the photo of me and Bill, a still shot from it. So it was pretty funny. But as far as being on the set and how you behave, there's like 100 people on a movie set running around. You've got the camera guys, and when you're ready to set up for a shot, like you finish a shot, the actors go back to their trailers, and then everything has to be moved. Like the next shot's over at this sound stage. So everybody's got to get out of the way so that the grips and the electric guys and the camera guys can get everything over to where it needs to be, and then they have to set up the shot. They have to get the lighting going. They have to get the cameras just right. They have stand-ins standing there so that they can look like what it's going to be like with the actors. As a production assistant, my job was pretty basic, which was to just do anything that they needed me to do. And a lot of times that was like keeping the public away from where we were filming, keeping the film crew quiet while we were shooting, making people understand like when we're shooting, when we're not shooting. You have to be quiet. You can't walk into the sound stage when they're in the middle of doing a scene, because then it screws the scene up. And then keeping track of the actors, that was a big part of it, because when they're ready to go, when they say, okay, we're ready to shoot here, the assistant director gets in his radio and he calls his production assistants and he says, okay, you got to bring the actors to the set. If you don't know where the actors are, you're going to lose your job. And it happens. Bill was famous for
Oh, yes.
Oh yeah, he was famous for leaving. He would get in the golf cart and he'd drive to a corner market to get beer and stuff. They'd be like, "Where's Bill?" I'd be like, "I don't know." He'd get in the golf cart and drove away. Like, "What do you want me to do? Tackle the guy?" He's like a big star. It wasn't easy wrangling him up for the shots, but he wasn't there. He was only there for like a couple of weeks. Woody was the one that was there for the majority of it. But there's a lot of standing around and waiting. It's really long days. It can be brutal. That movie was brutal. I worked like 20 hours a day. I was a zombie on the weekends. It was very cool. But yeah, when you get a job on the movie set, you got to hustle. If you don't, then they're just going to replace you with somebody else because everybody wants to do it. So, that's kind of how it was.
Well, it was definitely a highlight for me growing up. Like, I love that movie.
Yeah,
I actually rewatched it a while back, and I was like looking for that scene with you, and I was like, man, that can't be you. That guy's too like small.
I had hair.
Okay.
I actually had hair back
Yes.
then.
Okay, so HollywoodBloodletter.com. I'm gonna put that in the description as well.
Yeah.
For you to check out. Okay, let's get back to your book. So, what made you decide young adult? Like when you decided what to write? So, okay, it's gonna be like a Gothic horror.
Yeah.
Is it just because of the location, or like, are you just like, did you feel more comfortable with young adult school?
It wasn't intentional. I didn't set out to write a young adult book. It was more that I wanted to write a book around. I had several ideas of horror stories. That I had in my mind. Like 3 or 4 of them. But one of them that kept nagging at me was this idea of a girls' boarding school. Boarding school is just a great location for a horror film anyway. So the girls the protagonist is a 14-year-old girl. So that in and of itself kind of lent it to being a young adult story. I didn't want to write something that was going to be so graphic and disturbing that it wouldn't fit. People would be like, I don't know if, I don't know, maybe some people would love it. I don't like movies like Hostel and stuff like that are just so, hardcore. I'm not. That's not my thing. So I'm more into like the slow burns, very spooky movies like Sixth Sense and Silence of the Lambs and stuff like that, where they kind of slow play it and drag you along. You know, the blade of the razor, and it's much more psychological. So, and I also I've always loved coming of age movies. I think they're so fun to watch. You know, you think of movies like where the kids are taking on the world, they're fighting the world, whether it's like E.T. Or Stand By Me, or you know, movies like that, or even It. Like when you see It, that's really, it's got like a coming of age feel to it, where it's these young kids taking on you know, this big monster of sorts. And so that's what this turned into. It turns into 3 girls. There's 2 specifically that become very good friends. Here's that light, by the way, that's going to shine off the side of my head. So I got the sun coming in over here. I apologize for that. But so it's the three 14-year-old girls, and you know, one of them is haunted. She's haunted by this sort of monster ghost that she saw when she was a very little girl. She saw this he's manifested as a man, kind of like a Frankenstein, and he kills somebody, and she witnesses it as a very young age, and nobody believes her because she's too young. They think that she had a terrible dream. And so when she gets to Ashley Hall School 10 years later as a freshman, she meets a girl who's really into voodoo and Wicca and doing seances and stuff. And her name is Gia. And so they become very good friends very quickly. And Gia's fascinated. She doesn't tell Gia immediately, but they take on a dare to stay in a condemned dormitory building overnight. And so they do that, and that's when it kind of, the monster resurfaces, and they start to find out the origins of where he came from. He's not one of these monsters that just sort of, you know, appears. Like, he has a background, he has a history, and they discover what that history is. I didn't want it to just be like this monster who goes around killing people like Michael Myers or something like that. I wanted there to be, I wanted him to have an explanation as to where he came from and why. And so that's what happens when they discover this VHS tape. They're sitting in this dank building, there's no lights, it's filthy, it's condemned, and they're doing it on a dare, sitting inside. It's disgusting, and then they see this inside a vent. So it's something in this little vent over here, and they unscrew it and they pull it out, and it's an old VHS tape. And they end up watching it, and on the tape, they discover the night that the building became haunted 40 years earlier, and it sort of changes everything, and the monster's back, and all this other stuff. And then, of course, there's 2 boys. There's also a brother school, sister school, whatever you want to call it, called Porter Gaud, and that's also named after a school here in Charleston where I live, which is not an all-boys school, but in the novel it is. And so there's 2 boys who are smitten on the girls. They're, you know, the boys are 14-year-old geeks, kind of like Diary of a Wimpy Kid type of boys, but they love, you know, they like these girls and they're excited to be around them, and so they end up in the fray, and so the 5 of them end up working together and being very close friends and taking on this giant monster that ends up haunting them and coming after them and stuff. After they finally come to the conclusion that he's real, for a long time, or for a little while, they're thinking this can't be real or whatever. And then when they finally realize that he actually exists because they see him, then, you know, they all come together and they help Emily, who's the protagonist, to try and slay the monster.
And any well, if you think now back to, and we're gonna peek back now into your past creativity, where all that comes from. Do you think any of the characters are like based off real people that you knew while back in school?
I use some of the names, like I use people's names that I know, for sure. And some of the people that are buying the book are probably going to have a chuckle because I use some names of people that we went to high school with and stuff. So I'm going to, for certain, have that. But as far as the personalities, no, it wasn't anything like that. There isn't any characters that I based anybody off of. I just kind of wanted it to be, I wanted it to feel like, like you feel when you're that age. That was the biggest thing for me, is like thinking back on how I was when I was 14 or 15, where you're at that age where you're so insecure about everything and you're so unsure about everything. You haven't really developed a real sense of confidence that you get as you get older, where you really feel much more comfortable in your skin and you know what you're all about. When you're 13, 14, 15, those years they can be pretty bumpy years for people. You're trying to negotiate your way through, not getting embarrassed in front of your peers, and trying to find a girl that likes you, or trying to just get through the awkward years of developing, and embarrassing. You're gonna do embarrassing things and stuff. Everybody can think back to their high school years and be like, oh my God, I can't believe that. I don't even like to think about it. It's so cringeworthy. So I wanted to tap into that, and I wanted the characters, through the experience that they had here. It wasn't just a horror story. I wanted them to have character arc, where they really learn a lot about themselves and about friendship and about standing up for themselves and standing up for what's right, and having the guts to do that. And sometimes it takes a long time for that to develop, especially when you're that young and you're in your formative years. It's hard to assert yourself as much as as when you get older. And so I think the characters in it end up really having a lot of arc. They end up developing. By the end of it, they're different. They're very different, and you can see it when you're reading it, and you can see it in the way that they interact with each other, the things that they say, and just you just know it from what they went through. So I liked that part. That was a big part for me. There's a cute little love story in there. It doesn't end with them, swirling in a kiss under the moon or anything like that. But it's a fun, love story crush that one of the boys has on the girls, and I just think it came together nicely. I was happy with that aspect of the book for sure.
No, excellent. So let's jump way back to, like you said, when you were watching Abbott and Costello. Where did everything begin, like inspiration-wise? Creativity, inspiration, like what movies, books, what turned you into the creative person that you are today?
Turned me into the monster that I've become. So when I was a kid, I loved comedy and I loved horror. Those are my two things. I used to watch Peter Sellers movies, The Pink Panther.
Nice.
I was obsessed with those. I used to be so happy when they were on TV. I was like, oh my God, The Pink Panther's on. And he did one called A Shot in the Dark, and then he had Pink Panther 2, and then he had a couple other ones. They redid them with Steve Martin, which I don't know how anybody could redo those movies. That's like remaking Rocky, as far as I'm concerned. It's just like, you don't remake Rocky. I don't think you remake the Pink Panther movies. But anyway, Peter Sellers was a genius. He was a comedic genius. He was a physical comedian. He was before Jim Carrey and Mike Myers and those guys that did that do it very well. He was sort of the predecessor to that, and I used to just cry laughing watching those movies. The slapstick aspect of it. So I always loved that, and then I always was attracted to horror movies. I remember watching old horror movies like Burnt Offerings and Amityville Horror. I can remember seeing Poltergeist, the original Poltergeist, in theaters, which was a really good one. It was really spooky, and that was a fun horror film. The one that I didn't find fun was when I saw The Exorcist. And I think I was too young to watch it, but I was like, whatever. My mother used to let me watch them, and I kind of had a little swagger because I'm like, I can watch whatever horror films, and I'm fine with it. Man, I couldn't sleep that night. Like, I was in my bed with the blanket around me, like I was like sweating. And this is a true story. The night I watched it, I'm in the house. at my parents' house, and I'm just completely like panicked. It's like 1 a.m. I can't even sleep. And I swear to God, I heard this like growling sound down the hall, and I was like, "Oh my God!" It literally made me like think like this isn't a dream. This is really happening. And so like it took me like a few seconds to think, and it was my father snoring. He used to snore so loud, and I actually heard him down the hall like snoring. And it sounded like a growl at first, and it was the night that I watched The Exorcist. So I'll never forget that. But so that was my inspiration as far as the stuff that I like to watch. And I was big into movies. I was always big into movies. I did read. I wasn't a huge reader, but I liked movies a lot. And I knew that I wanted to be involved in storytelling in some capacity, and I was a good writer. So I think the first time I really started to realize that I had the potential to be a writer was when I was in the 7th grade or 6th grade. I can't remember which one. I had an English teacher named Mrs. Dufresne, Edna Dufresne. And I can remember my sister, who was older than me, had Mrs. Dufresne as an English teacher. And she said, "Oh, you're going to hate her. Oh, Mrs. Dufresne's the worst. You're going to hate her." Well, I loved her. And not only did I love her, but she loved me. She thought I was like the greatest. I don't know. She just thought I was the greatest student because I was a good writer. So we had an assignment where we had to write a story of some kind, a short story. I think it had to be like 10 pages long, which was pretty long for a 6th or 7th grader to write. So I wrote a comedy, and it was about a private detective who lived in Chicago, and he had an office on the top floor, and he was this incompetent buffoon. I kind of used the slapstick notion. And he's in his office, and he knocks over a cup of coffee, and it destroys his answering machine. This is when answering machines were around, so it short circuits and sparks go everywhere. And so he takes the answering machine, he throws it out the window of the building. It goes down and it hits somebody in the head, and it kills the person. So the police come, and they can't figure out how the person died. And then the person's family comes to his office, the private detective's office, and they hire him to find out who killed their family member. And so it starts this kind of wacky little cycle. And so when it was done, I passed it in. I got an A on it. But Mrs. Dufresne asked me to come speak with her after class was over. And she said to me, "Did you write this?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she said, "Did you see this on TV?" And I was like, "No, I didn't see it on TV." I didn't know where she was going with it. And she's like, Did you ever see it in like a movie or something?" And I was like, "No." And she was like, "Okay." And then she said it was really good, and she gave me an A. And it took me a while to figure out it, but she was thinking to herself, like, this kid's only in the 6th or 7th grade, and he's writing something like could have been a TV episode. And then
if it wasn't for the humor side, I think it's like an Alfred Hitchcock episode.
Yeah. It could be. You're right. It could be like a Hitchcock episode, something like that. But when it was, like I said, when I reflected back on it, because I was a quiet kid and I wasn't a troublemaker, and I wasn't a cheater in school for sure. I was a good student, so I wasn't sure why she had said it. And then after a while, I figured it out, and I'm like, she thinks that it was really good. That's why she was asking me if I had actually written it. And then I started to think to myself, I might be a decent writer. And then we had a poetry award, and I ended up winning it. I don't write poetry now, and I wrote some really lame poem, but I won the award, and at the award ceremony, I won $20 for the poem from Mrs. Dufresne. So she was the first one that kind of inspired me to believe that I had the potential to be a writer, and so to Edna Dufresne, I have the tip of the cap.
Thank you.
Yes.
No, for sure. So, what's coming after The Haunting of Ashley Hall School?
So I'm already done with my second novel. Obviously, you know how long the process is to get something published. So I finished Ashley Hall School last year. I've had to go back and do edits and do a lot of rewriting and stuff like that. But in the meantime, I wrote another book. It's not young adult. It's an adult psychological horror story is what I would call it, called Dream House. and it's about a young couple who purchase a stigmatized property. They live in New York City and they want to move to an island. So they move to this island. It's a fictitious island called Devil's Island, and it's a barrier island in North Carolina. And they find this pocket listing, this real estate agent. He's not even going to put it out publicly, but he's got a pocket listing, and it's just kind of an impossibly low price. And so they go down to look at the house, and they're like, "How could this house be $450,000? Like these houses are like $1 million houses, $2 million houses." And so he tells them it's a stigmatized property. There was a terrible event that happened here. The people that lived before you in this house. The woman murdered her husband. She shot her husband in the back of the head, and then she got into a canoe and she went out into the water and she drowned herself. And said, so, the house had to be, kind of cleaned up and all this different stuff. And some people find the house to be like haunted, or they don't want to live here. So the couple's like, they talk it over and they decide to go ahead and buy the house. And then when they're in there, the wife finds the diary of the woman who murdered her husband, and she starts to read the diary, and she becomes sort of obsessed with it. First she tells her husband, "I found the diary, can you believe it? It's the diary of the woman that lived here." And then she becomes so obsessed with it that the husband becomes concerned, and then he is having dreams of another woman, and in his dreams he gets to the point where he can't differentiate when he's sleeping and when he's awake. So he keeps going back and forth with his wife. And he says, "I dreamt about you last night." And he's like, "But it was you, but it wasn't you." You know how that happens when you have somebody in your dream and you're like, "I know it was Joe, but it didn't look like Joe. It looked like somebody else." So that's what he's constantly doing. And then the two of them, their marriage becomes very strained as they're living in this house. And it kind of comes to a head at the end. But it is nearing completion. It actually is completed. It just needs a lot of editing, and I know that Crystal Lake has a window of another 7 days, right, for open for submissions. So I am hoping that I can get it done enough to be able to pitch that, and I'll send it out to some agents and stuff like that as well. But that's what I've been working on. I've been working hard on it. And then I have another short story, which I'm really excited about. I think it's a fantastic concept. I've talked to you about it before. It's called A Cup of My Blood, and it's a great concept. I think it could be a fantastic series, but I'm writing it as a long short story. It's probably going to be like 8,000 or 9,000 words, but it's got a lot of potential. So those are the two things I'm thinking of. And then what you alluded to earlier, I have a screenplay that I'm writing as well, which is called Wind Chime Witches. And I think that is going to be my first movie that gets made. I'm confident about that. It's a home run idea. So that's all keeping me busy. It's just a matter of, is there enough time in the day to do all that and still, still find time to watch football and feed my cats and all that stuff. So
No, true. So any final advice for authors out there, and this can be for screenwriting, fiction writing, whatever?
Yeah. When we talked, like I said before, with the whenever I see writers ask that question, and it is good advice, is to read a lot. But I think any kind of storytelling, whatever you like, if you like watching movies, watch movies. If you like TV shows, watch TV shows. Obviously reality shows aren't going to be the same thing, but if you like reading, then read. And read whatever you want, whether it's smut or romance or horror or whatever. Read the stuff that's interesting to you and entertains you, because you want to start to pay attention to how it's entertaining, like how the storyteller got you interested in it. What is it that you like about it? And when I write stuff, I give it to my friends that read a lot and watch a lot of TV, and they're not writers, but they can pick out what they don't like. They're just really good at it. There's some people that are just spot on. You'll give them a script, and they're not writers, and they couldn't put a story together for $10 million. But they can read your story, and they can say, I didn't believe the relationship. It just didn't ring true to me. And you'll look at it, and you'll think, yeah. And a lot of times you knew it underneath. You're just trying to kind of sneak through and hope that nobody notices. But when somebody points out a weakness in your story, for me, a lot of times I'll think, yeah, I knew that. I needed somebody to tell me that, but I did underneath it all. I knew that was a weak part of this, and I'm going to go back and make some adjustments and make some changes. My advice to people that want to write is to write. Just, look at the things that you like to understand the way that they're formatted and the way that that it happens. Storytelling does have a way of being formatted, especially screenwriting. It's written in 3 acts, but even novels or storytelling in general, it follows a path, it follows a pattern. So you can't be all over the place. You have to have some understanding of how a story is written. But the way that you do that is you write and you screw it up. You're gonna, the first time you write, you're not gonna write, The Shawshank Redemption or Good Will Hunting or something like that. You're going to write something that you're going to think back later and be like, God, that was such a bad script. It was awful. I hope nobody ever finds it. But you do that 2, 3, 4, 5 times, and all of a sudden it gets better. It gets better. It gets better, and as time goes on, you start to be good at it. And then the biggest thing I learned in high school from my high school English teacher, whose name was Tom Flangheady. He was a great guy. And he's still alive today. He was a great teacher. He used to always say, the key to good writing is rewriting. Don't write something once and think you've got it done. You got to rewrite it over and over and over and over again. And he was so right about that. I'll write something, and if I rewrite it 5 times, I'll go back to the original and I'll see how messy it was, and then how much better it got with each subsequent edit that I give it. If you can edit 6, 7, 8, 9 times, you'll see that you repeated words, you use too many adverbs, you needed to move some sentences around, and the more you do it, the cleaner it is. It just gets clean, until you start to be like, okay, this is actually pretty good. Like, I can give this to somebody and they'll focus on the story instead of the choppy writing. Because when you make mistakes with your writing, it becomes a distraction to the reader. They want to be immersed in the story. They want to just get so immersed in the story that they're not even noticing your writing. They're just reading what you've written in the story. And when they see poor writing or mistakes, it distracts them from the story, and that's not what you want.
Yeah, I don't want that.
Yeah. So I think that's a big thing: is write a lot and rewrite a lot. Those would be my 2 pieces of advice, and it's not easy. It's not easy. Writing's hard to do, man. Writing's hard to do, and rewriting is hard to do. It's lonely, and it's depressing, and it's you'll be broke, but it's a labor of love, and maybe someday you'll end up rich, and maybe someday you'll end up famous, but you got to do it because you get the ink in the blood, and you're passionate about storytelling and that kind of a thing. So the writers that are out there that are real writers, they'll keep going no matter what. They'll keep doing it no matter what happens. I got a garbage truck going by.
Oh.
Could you hear that?
Yes. I'm just gonna mark this down as just to edit out this little bit. Okay, so any last words to readers out there, like why they need to pick up your book, or just check out any of your writing?
Yeah.
As we move forward.
Well, everybody's got their style. When I read, sometimes you get the writers, the readers that want to have the brandy snifter and a pipe, and they all want to talk about how flowery and wonderful Truman Capote's writing is, or somebody like that. I've never been that way. I like to read stuff like Hunter S. Thompson. I like Charles Bukowski. I like writers. Everybody has a particular style, and as a reader, you're going to have a particular style. I don't like dense prose. I don't like stuff that's really the stories that you work your way through. I never liked that. When people say, it's a great book, but you have to work your way through the first 100 pages. I'm not working my way through anything. If this story isn't good, then I'm putting it down. I'm not waiting for the payoff at the end. So I think one of the things that I do when I write is I try and make the story as entertaining as possible. I don't think it's like difficult reading. I think it's like fun, kind of ghost stories. And, I worked really hard at it. I love the story that I wrote. And I think people who are into those types of stories, kind of a Twilight Zone, Tales from the Crypt, people that like those kinds of things, are going to like this. If you like the kind of the spooky movies where, it's a cabin on the lake type of a feel to it, or, the hotel like in The Shining up in the middle of a snowstorm, it sets a really nice ambiance for a horror story. And I think the best part of my book are the characters, for sure. I think that I wrote really great characters. And so that in and of itself is I think going to get people hooked on it. They'll read it and they'll just think, these characters are great. I could read about them all day long. So, if they like it, then keep going.
Well, what you described now is pretty much what the House of Shadows and Ink, this channel, is about. So anyone who hangs out here as either a fan or creator, this is a book they need to read, like either for the fun of it or actually to like learn from your techniques and the characters that you wrote and all that stuff. So anyone watching this needs to buy the book.
Yes.
Well, Jim, thank you so much. Good luck with the launch. Good luck with your screenplays and everything you're working on. I'll definitely keep an eye on everything and looking forward to reading more of your work.
Thank you very much, Joe. I appreciate you having me on.
Thanks for coming on the show.
You got it.
Cheers.
Take care.
And okay, so I'm not going to stop yet because I want to ask you quickly a few questions, which we're just going to use for the shorts. So you could either mention a favorite of this year or a favorite of like all time. Okay, so what's your favorite? We're going to go movie, authors, digital games, like PlayStation, whatever, board game if you do play, and comic books. Do you read or did you have a favorite comic book kind of thing?
Yeah, I do not have a favorite comic book.
Okay, so we can just do movie, book, board games.
I don't have a favorite board. I mean, I played my sister used to make me play board games. She loved it.
Okay, so we're just gonna do maybe movie series and.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so what's your favorite movie?
My favorite movies, I can't pin down one. I would say that my top five, you have to put The Godfather in there. I think The Godfather is probably maybe the best movie I've ever seen. But Francis Ford Coppola was such a great director at that time. I mean, for him to do The Godfather 2, and Apocalypse Now is just unbelievable. Those are three of my favorite films ever. So I'm just going to put Francis Ford Coppola in his own little category there, at least during that stretch of time. I also love Rocky. I think Rocky is one of the best movies ever made. It's just such a simple concept, and it's so inspirational. I don't think there's ever been a sports movie like Rocky. Everybody loves that movie. The soundtrack is great. It's just this down-and-out fighter who gets the chance of a lifetime. And it's all about just getting up. And I love the fact in Rocky is that he doesn't win. You think he's going to win the championship. You think this is going to be it. He's going to win, beat Apollo Creed. But he doesn't. His goal is to just go the distance with the champ because he knows he's got the heart to do it. He's not a good enough fighter to beat him, but he knows that he's not going to lose by knockout. And that's what he does. He pushes himself up off the mat, and Apollo's beating him to a bloody pulp, and it's like the 15th round, and he gets up and he just curls his mitts like, let's go. And, you just see Apollo Creed's shoulders slouch. It's just such a fantastic fantastic movie. And then I love Boogie Nights. That's one of my favorite movies ever made. Paul
Oh,
Thomas
yes.
Anderson's fantastic. Boogie Nights is I think it's a total masterpiece.
Cool. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
been a while since I've seen that one.
yeah.
What's the guy's name, the actor?
Well, you had Mark Wahlberg.
Mark Wahlberg. That's
Yeah,
it.
John C. Riley was
Cool.
in it. Burt
Yes.
Reynolds. Burt Reynolds was great
Yes.
as the foreign director. It was a funny movie, but it was also it was a really well done movie. Great acting and Paul Thomas Anderson's a talented guy. He's one of my favorite directors
For
for
sure.
sure. Yeah.
And a favorite series?
My favorite TV series, I don't watch that many anymore. I hear so many people saying like, "Oh, you got to watch this one. You got to watch that one." I don't have like Paramount. I don't have HBO, Hulu, and stuff because there's so many different things that I get lost. So historically, I would say I used to watch The Shield, which was with Michael Chiklis. He was like a corrupt cop. I loved that series. Breaking Bad is one of my favorites of all time. So I guess in both of those, the protagonist is a bald guy. So maybe there's some connection there. I don't know. I'm getting like a connection to them. So those two series, I would say, are my favorites. But as a kid, I loved Tales from the Crypt. I loved
Yes.
watching Tales from the Crypt, and
Yes. Same.
anything like that. Like I loved The Twilight Zone. I loved Alfred Hitchcock Presents. Anything spooky and eerie, I was very very into. But The Crypt Keeper every week it was on HBO, and then when it went to syndication, I would boom, I watch it over and over again. Then they made the movies and stuff like that, and that was a great one. I loved it.
I agree. And then the last one, favorite book, let's say of this year so far and like all time.
Um, I haven't read anything that's like a new release, to be honest with you, because I've been writing so much that I kind of had to choose which one I was going to do. I would say my favorite book of all time, again, I hate to go back to The Godfather, but The Godfather, I bought
Mm.
the novel at a flea market in Oakland, California for 50 cents because it was water damaged. And I opened it up and I couldn't put it down. Mario Puzo was just he was a brilliant writer. And The Godfather, I could not put it down. Like from page one, every single bit of that book, I just was obsessed with. And like it was the best book I've ever read. I also loved Fight Club. I thought that was a really good book. I actually think they did a fantastic job with the movie as well. It might have even been better than the book, but I did like Fight Club a lot. And I liked. There's a few other ones that I was into, like Fear and Loathing Las Vegas. I mean, it's really not a novel, but I just like that Gonzo style that Hunter S. Thompson had. And I'm a fan of Elmore Leonard. Elmore Leonard wrote some great crime stories. I remember reading Glitz. It was one of my favorite books. Right now, I'm reading Rosemary's Baby. I
Oh,
don't know if that's
nice.
coming through, but that's
Yes.
on my current list to be read. And then this guy here, George Pelicanos. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's sort of like an Elmore Leonard guy. He writes crime stories, and he's really good at it too. Um, and then I like The Trial by Franz Kafka. I love philosophical
Oh,
stuff. I
yes.
use a lot of philosophy in my writing. It just goes so
That's
well
cool.
with horror. Philosophy and religion lend themselves to writing a great horror story, or at least threading it in there. And Franz Kafka, I was introduced to him in college, and I read The Trial, and we studied it. We really broke it down with this Jesuit professor that I had named Tom Reagan at Fairfield University. I went to Fairfield University in Connecticut. But we did it. We studied The Trial. I read The Trial, and I loved it. I thought it was great. And then I got into Kafka a little bit more, and he's one of my favorite writers
No,
for
same here.
sure. Yeah.
I've got The Trial and The Godfather, and there was another one you mentioned all here in my bookshelves as well.
Nice.
Yes. some
Yeah.
amazing stuff.
That's
Okay,
great.
so I think that's up to there. I'm gonna stop here now.